This guy is a commander in a mercenary organization that has been terrorizing Ukrainian soldiers and citizens, even watching his own soldiers be killed if they run or refuse to fight. But he's now suddenly gained a conscience and claims he doesn't do anything wrong. This is a kleptocratic quasi-paramilitary organization, not just in Ukraine, but in many African countries and in Syria. So yeah, I'm not buying the story, but I'm sure the court of law will determine that. Will Ukraine be able to fight back against this? Yes. The Wagner Group has lost close to 80% of their soldiers doing wave after wave of attacks. And those soldiers are mostly criminals that have been brought out of prisons to fight in this group without any military capabilities, and even by Prigozhin's words himself, take your criminal activities to the front lines and use them. And they have done so repeatedly. The Ukrainians have been very good in terms of countering this organization in Soledad and Bakhmut. It has been a tough fight for the last couple of weeks. Yep. The strategic value of that town is, in my view, I can't figure out why either side is fighting, but I know Ukraine continues to fight because they want to regain their territory. I believe they will eventually cave and crumble, and it's becoming more likely day by day. You see Shoigu in a very clean environment presenting medals. He has been the guy that's been in charge of Russia's military for the last 10 years, as well as General Gerasimov. They are responsible for the utter failure, for the kleptocracy, for the corruption within the military that has caused a lack of training, a lack of soldier skills, and a defeat on the battlefield. So that competition between Shoigu and Gerasimov with Prigozhin, the Wagner Group commander on the other side, is just a fascinating thing from a professional military guy like me to watch, because it's just a comedy of errors, and it shows how corrupt not just the military is, but the entire Russian governmental system. And that's why soldiers won't fight for this kinds of action. It's just very difficult for a professional to explain what we're seeing, how bad the Russian military, the Russian government is as exhibited on the battlefield. First, talk about whether this is a Russian missile or an air defense missile. It is the former, not the latter. It doesn't take an expert to determine that that was literally hundreds of pounds of explosives in a missile that contributed to that building falling. An air defense missile does not have that. So it's another instance of Russia just flat out lying. Now, I won't get too geeky on air, but this is an issue of a strategy of attrition on Russia's approach. In warfare, there's strategies of attrition where you try and exhaust the enemy, wear down the enemy, and bring different things to bear. Annihilation is where you try and outmaneuver the enemy, get them in a position where you can attack them and force a decision on the part of the other government to surrender. But the difference here is Russia is using a strategy of attrition not against the Ukrainian military force, but against the civilian force in an attempt to make President Zelensky have a lack of will to continue this fight. It's not working, as you just said. There's more resilience now in Ukraine than there's ever been. But unfortunately, this is going to continue. I don't think we're in a stalemate. There are certainly massive struggles going on in Kherson, in the Donbass, and it's a difference in approach, like I just said, in strategy between Russia trying to affect the Ukrainian people, while Ukraine's army is trying to affect the Russian army and get them out of the country. That's a strategy of attrition, forced decisions, because you are defeating the security force of the enemy. So this is certainly not a stalemate. But what needs to happen, unfortunately, a couple things. Russia has to run out of ammunition, which I don't see happening anytime soon. There's certainly indicators that they have less and less ballistic missiles to fire. But in this case, as an example, this weekend, those Kh-22 missiles that Fred was just talking about, indicators are there's about 50 of them as part of their Black Sea fleet that Russia can fire. They allegedly fired about 14 this weekend. So you still have almost 3/4 of the ones left on ships and submarines in the Black Sea, as well as coming by air. So it's going to continue, but what has to happen with Ukraine is they have to get an improvement in their maneuver force to continue to conduct attacks and offensives against the Russians' military and continue to drive them out of the country. That's what you see. It is somewhat of a stalemate between types of strategies, but I believe that Ukraine will have the power to continue their counteroffensives. The state sponsor of terrorism moniker requires certain things within the State Department, the Commerce Department, the Treasury Department. When you have this other designation of an aggressor state, you have more leeway to do different things. And I just listened to your report that some congressional members are saying it doesn't hold, President Biden isn't holding Russia accountable. That is a ludicrous statement because of the previous things this administration has done against the Russian state. But this gives the president and his administration much more flexibility in what they can and can't do. And I think he's going to convince President Zelensky that this is the best approach to take. This is not only from the standpoint of an embarrassment of the Russian military, but President Zelensky was just on the battlefront yesterday in Bakhmut, giving awards to soldiers. He's flown to Washington. He's going to be greeted by a very rabid audience that's supporting him. At the same time, President Putin and his defense minister, Shoigu, were in Belarus yesterday begging for support from one of the few allies they have left. Shoigu was even limping and had an injured hand when he went there. So it kind of shows the stark contrast between the Russian state imploding versus Zelensky and the Ukrainian state receiving more support. There better be some expectation management in the insertion of Patriot missiles. It will take a long time to get these employed, the Ukrainian soldiers and repairmen and suppliers trained on them. And I'm not talking weeks, I'm talking months. And as David said, this is a point defense system, and this is one battery. That's a company level organization that has between 6 and 8 launchers, one massive control system, and a massive radar system that just takes a lot of time to understand and use. Yeah, I know Ukraine has proven themselves to be great on the battlefield, but they can't just fall in on this piece of equipment. And this piece of equipment can't move around. It is a stationary point defense capability. I think, I'll add again to what David said, I think this is a push and a wedge to have Secretary Austin go back to the Ramstein group in the future and say, hey, we just provided a one-of-a-kind. There are no other weapons like this in the world. We have provided this one-of-a-kind system to Ukraine. Some of you other folks better start ponying up a lot more low and medium range system. One last thing I'll say, Kate, in terms of expectation management. Patriot is a defensive weapon system. You don't win wars on the defense. What I would be looking at is not so much Patriot as what's coming next with this big package, the capability of putting together combined arms teams to conduct offensive operations by Ukraine in the southeast and the east, and potentially stopping any kind of aggression that might come from Belarus in the north. That's what I'm looking for, and that's what the big money in this next package is going to pay for.